It all began with something almost imperceptible, a tiny flicker of curiosity, a subtle instinct that something was slightly off in an otherwise ordinary neighborhood. To most, it would have been nothing, easily dismissed as imagination. But for one neighbor, that flicker was enough to spark a chain of events that would ultimately unravel a secret carefully hidden for over 10 years. This story doesn't start with crime, scandal, or public outrage. It starts with something far more relatable: observation. The kind that anyone living in a quiet street might feel, that gentle, nagging sensation that a person or a place isn't quite as it seems. For years, the residents on this suburban street lived in the comfortable rhythm of daily life: morning coffee, children playing on sidewalks, mail arriving like clockwork. Yet behind the seemingly mundane, one house held a secret that would shock even the most imaginative minds. The house itself was unremarkable from the outside. A modest 2-story home, well-maintained lawn, and the familiar creak of a mailbox door. It blended perfectly with the others, so ordinary that no passerby would have guessed anything was unusual. The neighbors were friendly, polite, but kept their distance, respecting privacy without suspicion. Among them lived a woman, the kind of person who noticed the small details others often overlooked. She saw patterns in the mundane: the way mail piled up too long, the occasional late-night lights that never seemed to follow a schedule, the subtle absence of activity that should have been there. At first, she didn't think much of it. People have odd schedules. Packages get delayed. Life is unpredictable. But as weeks turned into months and months into years, her attention sharpened. There was a consistency to the oddities, a quiet rhythm that didn't match normal behavior. What she initially dismissed as quirks began to look like deliberate concealment. Some might say it was intuition, or perhaps a combination of boredom and curiosity. But what followed was a careful, patient observation. She didn't confront the residents or make accusations. She simply watched, noted, and collected what could later be confirmed. There's a certain power in patient observation, a slow unveiling of truth that doesn't rely on dramatics or assumptions. The first real clue was subtle. A single window left slightly ajar at odd hours, often during times when the house should have been empty. Sometimes she noticed glimpses of activity that didn't match the family living there. It was never anything direct, just shadows, sounds, or movements glimpsed from a distance. And over time, these minor discrepancies formed a pattern too precise to ignore. As her attention sharpened, she began noticing smaller signs outside the house. Tools left in odd places, peculiar modifications in the garden, items that seemed out of place for a typical household. What might have appeared innocent to others was, for her, a language of hidden behavior. It's a curious thing how humans can detect what doesn't fit. Sometimes it's not about seeing the full picture immediately, but noticing that a piece of the puzzle feels wrong. Weeks later, she observed something that intensified her suspicions. A delivery arrived, an unassuming box, clearly addressed and yet handled in a way that suggested secrecy. The residents quickly moved it inside, almost furtively. No one else seemed to notice, yet for her, it was another thread in the growing tapestry of mystery. Driven by a mixture of concern and curiosity, she started documenting these events, not in a dramatic or intrusive way, but through careful notes and timestamps. This was a woman methodical in her approach, understanding that in situations involving long-held secrets, patience often yields the clearest truth. Then came a moment that would shift her role from passive observer to someone who could inadvertently trigger a revelation. A small accident, a misplacement of an item, a sound heard at just the right moment offered her a glimpse into a part of the house that had never been visible before. What she saw didn't immediately make sense. It was out of place, seemingly ordinary, yet carried a weight that hinted at hidden history. Curiosity intensified. She began cross-referencing what she noticed with public records and other sources of information that were legally accessible. Slowly, a picture began to emerge, not fully detailed, but enough to confirm that something significant had been concealed for years. Some reports suggest that she even spoke briefly with other neighbors, though carefully, without revealing too much. She wanted verification, not gossip. The revelation, when it finally came, was astonishing in its simplicity. The secret wasn't violent or criminal in the sensational sense. It was quietly extraordinary, a fact about the household that had remained invisible to the world and, more importantly, had been deliberately kept private. A decade-long concealment, masked by ordinary routines, polite nods, and closed doors. Some neighbors were shocked, others were intrigued, and a few were skeptical. It's human nature to question what upends our perception of normalcy, especially when it's rooted in something so familiar. The woman, however, remained measured. She didn't broadcast her suspicions. Instead, she allowed the evidence to guide her. Every observation she had documented, every minor anomaly noted over years, now aligned in a way that pointed conclusively to the truth at this point. The narrative shifted from suspicion to understanding. What had been hidden was no longer a secret. It was a story waiting to be recognized. The decade-long concealment now had context. The family living there had reasons for privacy, perhaps fears of judgment, or simply a desire to keep their personal lives shielded. It's a reminder that sometimes secrets aren't meant to harm, they're meant to preserve, to protect, or to survive unnoticed. Yet, the neighbor's role in exposing this secret raises an intriguing question about human observation. How often do we overlook what's right in front of us? How often do we dismiss subtle anomalies because they don't fit our expectations? The power of attentiveness, combined with careful patience, can illuminate realities that remain invisible to most. As the story spread, it was met with a mix of reactions. Some admired the neighbor's diligence, praising her for her careful, non-intrusive approach. Others criticized the intrusion, questioning whether observing for so long crossed a boundary. Both perspectives have merit, reflecting the delicate balance between curiosity and privacy. But the truth remained undeniable. Without her persistence, the secret might have continued for many more years, hidden behind ordinary routines and polite facades. Midway through this unfolding, there was a pivotal moment that captured public attention. A single overlooked detail, a minor discrepancy, easily dismissed, suddenly became the key that connected everything. It was a reminder that in life, small things often carry the most weight. A pattern emerges not from grand gestures, but from consistent, almost invisible signals. And when someone notices these signals, even in silence, the world can shift. By now, the revelation had sparked conversations beyond the neighborhood. People began reflecting on their own assumptions, the unseen layers in the lives around them, and the quiet mysteries that might exist next door, in an office, or even within their own families. The story, in its essence, is not just about one household or one observer. It's a meditation on human perception, patience, and the subtle power of attention. In the days that followed, the household responded with measured acknowledgement. They didn't release statements, nor did they seek media attention. Their choice to maintain dignity, despite being observed and eventually understood, added another layer of respect to the narrative. Some reports suggest they appreciated the neighbor's discretion, recognizing that exposure need not be sensationalized. To be meaningful, the neighbor herself reflected on her role with humility. She never sought fame or recognition. Her goal was understanding, not judgment. And in that, there is a profound lesson. Often, Uncovering truth isn't about confrontation or spectacle, it's about patience, attentiveness, and the courage to notice what others overlooked. As the story settles into public consciousness, one question lingers. What does it mean to live among secrets? We all share spaces with others, yet we rarely see everything. And sometimes it takes someone who observes, with care, not accusation, to reveal what has quietly existed for years. That revelation doesn't diminish privacy, it highlights the complexity of human life, the layers of experience that coexist within ordinary facades. Looking back, the decade-long concealment was never about deception in the traditional sense. It was about privacy, preservation, and personal boundaries. And yet, the neighbor's attention ensured that the secret, once hidden, could finally take its place in a larger story. It became a reminder that observation isn't just about noticing what's wrong. It's about understanding what exists beyond immediate perception, about patience, about the quiet power of noticing and respecting simultaneously. The story ends not with judgment, but with reflection. It challenges us to reconsider how we perceive our surroundings, how much we truly notice, and how even the smallest attentiveness can illuminate a hidden reality. The neighbor, in her quiet diligence, shows that curiosity, when tempered with respect, can reveal profound truths without causing harm in the end. This story leaves us with an emotional resonance, the realization that the ordinary is often extraordinary when examined carefully, that time and patience can reveal truths long buried, and that every neighborhood, every street, every home may hold layers unseen, waiting for a careful eye to uncover them. If there's one meaningful takeaway from this story, it's the realization that awareness and kindness don't have to stand in opposition to each other. In fact, they often work best when they exist side by side. Being aware of the world around doesn't mean becoming intrusive, suspicious, or judgmental. It simply means allowing ourselves to remain attentive to the subtle details that make up everyday life. You can observe without invading someone's privacy. You can question things that seem unusual without immediately assuming the worst. And you can notice patterns or behaviors without rushing to expose them recklessly or turn them into gossip. Sometimes, the most responsible thing a person can do is simply remain patient, thoughtful, and respectful while seeking understanding. In this story, the neighbor didn't act out of impulse or emotion. She didn't confront anyone dramatically, and she didn't turn her curiosity into public accusations. Instead, she allowed time to pass. She watched carefully. She trusted that if something truly important was hidden beneath the surface, the truth would eventually reveal itself through small details and quiet observations, and that patience is what ultimately made the difference, because often, the most powerful discoveries in life don't come from loud confrontations or sudden dramatic moments. They come from the slow accumulation of understanding, from the quiet realization that something doesn't quite fit, from the willingness to keep noticing, even when everyone else has stopped paying attention. Now, as you reflect on everything that unfolded in this story, take a moment to think about your own surroundings. What small details might suddenly stand out if you looked at familiar places with fresh eyes? Perhaps there are moments happening quietly around you that most people overlook. Perhaps there are patterns or behaviors that seem insignificant at first, but slowly begin to tell a deeper story. And perhaps, just like in this case, there are mysteries unfolding right beside everyday life, hidden not because they are impossible to see, but because most of us simply aren't looking closely enough. It's a humbling thought, but also a powerful one, because it reminds us that the world around is far richer and more complex than it appears at first glance. Behind ordinary doors, routine greetings, and familiar streets, there are layers of human experience that we rarely notice, and sometimes, all it takes to begin understanding those hidden layers is something very simple: curiosity guided by kindness, not Curiosity that seeks to judge or expose people unfairly, but curiosity that encourages us to look deeper, to ask thoughtful questions. Maybe there's a story from your own area that people still talk about years later. Or maybe this story simply reminded you that the world around us is full of hidden layers we rarely stop to think about. Whatever your thoughts are, I'd love to hear them. And if you enjoyed this story and would like to hear more narratives that explore the hidden sides of everyday life, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps bring more stories like this to life, stories that remind us that sometimes the most fascinating truths aren't found in distant places or dramatic headlines, but in the quiet corners of ordinary life, because at the end of the day, the extraordinary often lives right beside us, waiting patiently for someone willing to notice.